In this episode of Spearlift, we discuss how to recognize and also deal and cope with people who have narcissistic behaviors. So stay tuned. Dr. Alessandra, from your perspective, why might someone develop narcissistic behaviors throughout the course of their life?
Being narcissistic is very complex. There are usually different factors involved, like, for example, biological factors. We're born with a certain temperament, for example, and then with our life experiences, that temperament can develop into a narcissistic personality. A lot of people who are narcissistic have stories of childhood abuse, or they might come themselves from a home in which at least one of the parents, or even both, were narcissistic, or on the contrary, they might just be these children who grew up in an environment in which they were given everything that they wanted materially. However, their emotional needs were never recognized, were not taken care of, so they go learning to value material things and go cutting off all that feeling part in them.
So it has to do more, in your opinion, with emotional detachment, sounds like. And before we proceed even further, I want to let our viewers know, I think it's important having this conversation with you, doctor, because you're a psychotherapist from Mexico City. You have a specialty in eating disorders and have been specializing in narcissism and narcissistic abuse for over a year. And you're also been training with one of the leaders in this area. Can you just go into depth a little bit more about that as well? Like why you really wanted to get more engaged in this topic and why you're training with this specialist and who this person is, and why this is so important?
Yes, sure. Well, in my personal life, I've encountered many narcissistic people, and also when I was starting with my private practice as a psychotherapist, I started noticing that most of my patients, practically all of them, had been in a relationship with a narcissistic person, that they had gone through narcissistic abuse, whether it be a parent, a partner or spouse, or a boss. So I became interested in the topic for both reasons. And then as I went listening to this expert that you mentioned, Dr. Ramani, she made me realize how there were more and more narcissists, how much damage they can cause. And I wanted to be able to help my clients more effectively understand what narcissism is, what narcissistic abuse is about, and how to really help them, because I also found out that unfortunately there are few of my colleagues who are specialized in this area. They're very good professionals, but they have other areas of strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we need people who understand this. Mm-hmm. Because if you're not treated properly, then you can continue being in the relationship a lot longer than you would have, or the damage is even worse, or at the very least, you don't heal properly. Mm-hmm. Because the therapist you're going to doesn't see that main piece in the puzzle.
Right. Exactly. Dr. Sandra, I want to ask you, if someone is in a relationship and the degree of someone's narcissism is really affecting another person's relationship, how do you approach someone essentially and say, hey, I think you got this problem, you need to fix it, otherwise you're going to destroy our relationship together? How does that conversation actually start, in your opinion?
Well, usually that kind of conversation does not go well.
Right.
People who are narcissistic are characterized by having very little insight and a very big lack of empathy. So they don't really see how their behavior affects others, nor do they really care about that. Usually, when a narcissist looks for help, it's because they've been ordered to by a court, because, they've been pretty much threatened by a family member, and they go reluctantly. And we will always try to blame, like if it's a couple, they will try to blame it on the other person. Or if not, they will go to therapy, but for other things like anxiety or depression, but you will perceive a certain victimized speech story coming from them, like in the lines of, the world has never appreciated how great I am, and everybody's against me. So it's very difficult. And usually, when a couple does actually go to therapy, the therapist has to be really aware and really well versed in narcissism, because what happens is that sometimes they will end up buying the narcissist story and then re-victimizing the victim. It's like, oh, well, you need to work on communication. Oh, well, you shouldn't react that way. And it's like, okay, how can I communicate with a person who is not interested in communicating? When every time I try to talk about a problem, they will do things like stonewall, which is end the conversation. I'm not going to talk about that. Or blame the other person, like they're overreacting, and just not assume any responsibility whatsoever in the relationship.
How does someone get, how does someone generally get involved with someone who may have very deep-seated issues in narcissism? Like for example, I don't know, I'm just trying to think in my mind, if someone is like that, how do they charm their way into a relationship to be with somebody, if that makes sense, right? Is there like an initial sort of general charm people like that may have, but when it comes to deeper emotional things, they're devoid of it? Or how does that work?
Oh, yes, they are very, very charming at the beginning. And they will use something called love bombing. Like they will give you presents and write you these lovely messages and emails and make you think like you're the most important, special person in the world for them. Like they can't live without you, and you'll feel on cloud nine. But they are also very, very intelligent, very perceptive. They are very good at reading people, extremely skilled at reading people, and they will know exactly what to say, what to do, so that the person falls for them.
Right. So it's like top-notch con artistry to.
Pretty much, yes.
Right. But again, like, have you noticed or seen in your practice or through this program that you're going through when studying this, how do relationships, let's say you have someone who's, let's say, an ultra narcissist, and then just someone who's the complete opposite of that, how have you seen successful examples where the relationship has been saved and someone who has these deep-rooted aspects of narcissism kind of change around and become a different sort of person with that other person?
As a general rule, narcissists don't change. There are exceptions. As a matter of fact, I had a client, I have a client who went himself through a narcissistic abuse episode, and he himself was very, very narcissistic. And going through that experience, not as an abuser, but as the victim, made him wake up to how badly he had treated other people. But he is the exception. I can tell you very few cases, 2 or 3 cases, from what I've heard of and from other people and read. And usually what happens is they might change a little bit, especially as far as their behavior goes. It's very difficult for them to develop empathy. But then when things start to go wrong, when things aren't going the way they want to, or they're under a lot of stress, they tend to fall back on their own patterns.
Let's touch on really quick, what are the general, I don't want to say strengths necessarily, but what are the sort of attributes, like we kind of have mentioned already, that are typical of person who's narcissistic and maybe what they're good at? Like you've sort of mentioned before, charm and things like that. Let's kind of describe that a bit more, like the personification of who is a narcissist, what they are, their sort of attributes, but then describe what they really lack in. So let's just do that contrast really quick.
Well, these people at an interpersonal level, they tend to, as I've mentioned, they have a lot of lack of empathy. They tend to be very manipulative. They are very controlling. They might be pretty jealous. At a behavioral level, they tend to be very superficial, very envious of what other people have that they don't. They're very careless with what they say or what they do. Emotionally, they tend to be pretty dysregulated. Suddenly you'll say something that a non-narcissistic person would not think twice about, or they might answer you or whatever in a normal way. And a narcissistic person will go on into these rages and these tantrums like a 2-year-old child. They also tend to be constantly validation seeking. They love people to admire them and kiss up to them and say how great they are and stuff like that. But behind all that, they have a very fragile ego, and they are very prone to shame, which is what triggers the anger spiral. Now, how do they act? They tend to be very antagonistic. They act very grandiose, entitled, arrogant, passive aggressive, and at a cognitive level, they tend to lack insight, to not feel guilty at all for what they do. They never, as I said, they never assume their responsibility. They're very critical. Those are like the main things. The main characteristics are the grandiosity, the entitlement, the arrogance, the lack of empathy, and the validation seeking.
Those are the main ones. What
Yes.
I can, based on what you're saying, I can imagine that people who may fit this profile in a way lead a very lonely life. Do you find, meaning, the reason I say that is because when you're describing all these things, I have this imagery of someone who's always looking, trying to take, trying to control, trying to or its situation into what they want it to be, etc. And if they do get some gratification or a win for their particular situation, they may feel good in that moment, but it may not last. But it's very devoid of real, substantive human emotion and connection. So for me, I can imagine that those people are really lonely and maybe more depressed than most other types of people are. Have you found that with your work and your research?
Actually, in today's society that values materialism, achievements, and they are very good at that. So they are usually very successful people. Right. They will be company CEOs. They will be celebrities. They will be political leaders. So yes, I can see that for a normal person, an existence based on that would be very lonely. And yes, a lot of times they do end up being lonely because people do try to stay away from them. But for them, people are no more important than an object. They don't really feel conflicted about that, especially during the times when they are successful, when they are the head of the company, when they are the president, when they are the superstar. It's when things don't quite go their way that, yes, they will end up very depressed. And that's when they might end up at a therapist's office for the depression itself, not because of the narcissism.
What's the difference, in your opinion, doctor, with having, let's say, with feeling and being confident versus being narcissistic? Because there is, I wouldn't say that they're not the same, but the certain way of being bold, audacious, to take the initiative to do something and have the feeling that you can achieve that. What's the difference between being confident versus being, let's say, just full out narcissistic in that sense? Does one have more of a selfish motive to it, in your opinion?
Yes. The motive is definitely totally different. When you are truly a confident person, first of all, you don't need to boast about it.
Right.
You know what you have. You don't have to announce it. When you are a narcissist, it's more of a mask you wear to hide how vulnerable and how insecure you are way down deep. Whether you have it, and this, I'm talking about a really unconscious level. They just cannot let that insecure, vulnerable part of them ever come out. At an unconscious level.
Right, like no criticism, no room for debate. No, is this my way or the highway kind of thing?
Exactly. Right? That's one of their mottos: my way or the highway.
So, anyone that is in a relationship or any sort of relationship with someone who may have that personality, like what do you usually recommend to them to do to either improve their relationship with the person that they feel affected by with that type of personality? And like, what is usually your way of helping them through what they're going through or how they ultimately change their life? What do you usually tell them?
Well, ideally, the person will be able to detect that something's off about the person and not enter the relationship. But if they're in a relationship with the person, well, it would depend. The best choice is always to get out of the relationship and go no contact with that person. However, that is not always possible for whatever reasons. It might be you're in a job with a narcissistic boss and you cannot leave that job because you need the job, you need the money. So, okay, well, maybe you can try looking for another job. Or it might be a family member. Well, it's very difficult to cut off family members, especially in societies where the family is very valued. That's if you do take that option, you will be shunned.
Right, that's true. Yeah, that can be really hard.
Yeah, if it's a marriage, that's even more complicated because there might be children involved, there might be economic factors involved, social, cultural pressures, and everything. So, if you cannot leave the relationship, there are several techniques that I use and I recommend with my patients.
Which are? Can you describe them?
Well, yes. First of all, there is the DEEP technique. It's an acronym for don't defend, don't engage, don't explain, and don't personalize.
And what do each of those have that you can put into practice every day? And do you say those to yourself? Do you think about what those mean, or how does that work in practice day to day?
I tend to use it kind of like a mantra. If I know I'm going to be with a difficult person, a narcissistic person, it's like, okay. And I see that they're trying to bait me into having an argument, or I'm starting to lose my patience. Like, okay, Alessandra, remember, don't defend yourself. Don't engage with this person in an argument. Don't try to explain. They don't even care about explaining. And don't take it personal. That's how they are with everybody. Another technique that I've recommended to my clients is the gray rock technique. And it's basically that, being like a gray rock, as boring, unreactive, uninteresting as a gray rock.
Really? Wow. Like, why? So that person doesn't engage and try to bait you into their situation?
Yes, exactly. You stop being interesting to them. The thing is, what the narcissists look for is narcissistic supply.
Sure.
Somebody
that's good. Yeah.
who will validate them in one way or another and give them what they need in one way or another. Whether it be in a positive way, like, oh, you're so wonderful. Oh, you did this. I'm so proud of you. Or in a negative way, through an argument.
Yeah, which is the common thing, right?
So if you're not engaging in an argument with them, you're not giving them supply.
I think that's a very important point you're saying, because it is a situation and personality type that is looking for a certain type of fix for their situation, because it's really not enough. The normal sort of emotions, the normal sort of connections, the normal sort of self-fulfillment that you can get from yourself by knowing yourself, by taking care of yourself. It's feeding off the external stimuli always. So that's what it really seems like with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Doctor, just one final thing I want to ask you, and this has been a very, very important topic, and I really encourage anyone out there who's going through a situation with someone or recognize it within themselves, or, really want to kind of get through this issue in the best way they can, reach out to Doctora Alessandra. Will include her information in the show notes and everywhere else, and let us know below. Is this in the comments? Is this an important topic to you to know about, to, deal with in your own life or with someone you know? Is it an important issue in general that we must address in our common society? Let us know below in the comments. That would be great to know. And my final question to you, Doctor, and thank you so much for this really, really important and enlightening conversation on Spear Lifts, is what if someone, any person, like, who may recognize that this is an issue that they do have, if they don't deal with this issue right away, what are the, like, going back to what we were talking about, depression and other things, what are the sort of more deeper neurological, psychological issues they may face in the medium long term in their life that can really have damage to their overall state of being, their brain, their body? What are the deeper things that can affect in the long term?
Okay. When you're in a relationship with a narcissist, a long-term relationship, as you're saying, what happens? You are in a continual state of stress, of alert. And that has a lot of physical repercussions. You're constantly secreting cortisol, adrenaline, because you're perceiving a danger. Only you can't go out like in the ancient times and fight against the tiger, the mammoth, whatever. No. So the substances are continually being secreted, are still there. So they cause changes at a neurological level. The hypothalamus, the prefrontal cortex, all that has changes. Your health deteriorates. You can even start losing your hair and other physical ailments. Psychologically, you can usually see that because they are in a relationship in which they're constantly criticized, emotionally abused, gaslighted, which is always confusing you, trying to make you think that your reality isn't real, and the constant devaluation, dehumanization, they tend to present symptoms of anxiety, of stress, depression. As a matter of fact, there is an overlap between codependency, post-traumatic stress syndrome, or complex post-traumatic stress syndrome, and narcissistic abuse. And you have to treat all those symptoms. And the first thing you need to do, or the first thing I do with my clients, is give them psychoeducation. Okay, this is what's going on. This is what we're talking about. And usually that will help them, for example, let go a bit of the guilt, because they tend to blame themselves because the relationship isn't working, when it's really the narcissist. Also, they tend to feel the comfort knowing that their reality is real, that they're not going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And
No, go ahead.
all those symptoms, as I said, those main symptoms of anxiety, depression, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, all show up. And there is also an overlap with codependency. They have a lot of a difficult time separating themselves from the abuser because more or less in a codependent style, but actually what it is trauma bonding, in which the abuser has used the intermittent reinforcement. Sometimes they're nice, sometimes they're abusive, sometimes they're nice, sometimes they're abusive, sometimes they'll promise you the moon and the stars, and they'll pretend this wonderful future is waiting for them just to keep you hooked on the relationship.
Yeah, it's such a teasing
and all
sort of
that
thing.
Keeps you hooked because you think, well, you keep believing it.
Exactly. And that's the illusion. And really, anyone out there who's really going through a situation like this and they know it's not healthy, and I think it's really important what the doctor said, is that it puts you in this sort of stress situation. You're emitting these secretions in your mind and in your body that can ultimately put a lot of stress on the overall system of the entire of your body and your immune system, and that can probably lead to a lot of other sicknesses and very detrimental things for your overall health. Doctor, thank you so incredibly much for taking the time to speak about this issue. This topic's so important, and it's amazing that you're learning more about it. You're specializing in it, and I encourage anyone who wants to reach out to the doctor to have your own session with her or speak to her more one-on-one. Please feel free to do that. And where, doctor, can people find more information about you?
You can write to me at psic.alessandrasaenz with 2 S's Sáenz @gmail.com, or you can look me up in Facebook. I have my Facebook page, psic.alessandrasaenz, and you can reach me there, send me a message, and I'll be glad to get in touch with you.
Excellent. And for all of our viewers and listeners, we'll include the doctor's information in the show notes and the pinned comments in the video description, so you can find her and you can copy and paste that information and connect with her. So thank you so much, doctor. It was a pleasure to have you again on Spirit Lifts. It's been a while, but we thank you so much. Very important topic.
Thank you very much, Devin, for this wonderful opportunity. It's a topic I really feel passionate about, and I really want people to learn about it. And this is a wonderful opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, doctor. And we will see you all, Spirit Lifters, on the next episode. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.